Deltarune is a game that needs no introduction. You probably get it by now. It's a game that I've sort of grown up with. I liked Undertale a lot and got into it a couple months before ye ol' survey program.
When I say a couple minutes, I'm gonna say a couple months.
Also known as Chapter 1 dropped, and I was instantly hooked. That was like around 2018 or something, so I've been steady with this game for nearly a decade. By the time it finishes, it'll have been around half my life. That's a little scary to think about. Now, Deltarune is great. It's got an incredible story, rich cast of characters, and the thing people don't really mention much because of how interesting the other two are comparatively, gameplay. Now, not a ton of people talk about the gameplay of Deltarune, which I honestly think makes sense. A lot of Deltarune's gameplay is derivative of Undertale's gameplay, which was sort of the whole marketing shtick of it, so it definitely got its flowers. However, Deltarune is a lot different from Undertale. At first, the similarities were glaring, but as time goes on, Toby Fox clearly wants this game to be grander in every aspect of the word. The story is bigger, the visuals are much more detailed, and the thing I'm here today to talk about, the gameplay, is something Toby has been putting much more time and effort into, and it's something that's become more of a focal point with each new chapter. Now, while Chapter 1 and 2 did introduce some gameplay gimmicks, mainly things like the small punch-out sections with Queen, these were sort of just that. Small sections that occupied a really short amount of time in the chapter. They weren't bad or anything by any means, but they served to be more so small moments of, oh shit, the gameplay is different for a second, meant to catch players off guard and excite them for a moment. With Chapter 3, however, this completely changed, as this would be the start of the game introducing a big gameplay mechanic that lasts throughout the chapter. Chapter 3, 4, and 5 all do this, and spoiler alert, I think they all do a really good job at being a fun chapter-wide gimmick while not compromising on the flow of the chapter for the most part, and generally working and making sense alongside the primary genre of Deltarune. And a lot of people really don't talk about them, especially compared to other aspects of the game, and I'm here to do just that. So if you enjoyed the video, cool. Starting us off, Chapter 3 introduces us to winner of the 2026 Tumblr Sexy Man contest, Mr. Antenna, but we can call him Mr. for short. Mr. over here is a funny little character, being the dark world manifestation of the Dreamer's cathode ray tube, and the family trauma is so crazy it spread to the fucking TV. But blah blah blah, something something words, and now he sits us down to play TV Time, The Legend of Tenna. Shit, I thought it was Mr. for short. People sorta, kinda, really didn't fuck with this at first. I think opinions on it overall have gone up more positively as of late, but it's still very mixed and easily the most controversial out of this list. And being honest, when I first played it, my thoughts on it were pretty negative as well. So this game is essentially a dumbed-down, streamlined Zelda 1. It's rocking that 8-bit retro style, fuck yes bro, Mario, and it's got the simplified chiptune soundtrack to boot. The goal of this game board is to find 3 keys and a moon cloud stone. So with all that, once you're let go, you sort of just explore the board. Now when you first play this board, you're probably going to be wandering around pretty aimlessly. The gameplay loop usually goes down to wander around until you find a room of importance. It usually either has a puzzle or something to be gained, like an item that can be used to progress in another room. So you find a thing and then figure out what to do with that thing in order to get a key. Simplest example, partway through the board, you find the power croissant, which lets Susie pick up and throw pots. Now if you backtrack to an earlier part of the board, you'll find Lancer, who's stuck on the other side of this river atop a cactus. Shit's gotta hurt, man, I'm sorry. When you're here, you can push a button that spawns in some pots for Susie to throw at the cactus to let Lancer down. She throws Rouse, but same thing. So now you've got Lancer. Cool, well, what do you do with Lancer? You just gotta go over to one of these Lancer spots and let him do his thing! And then boom, a key. That's what the gameplay loop of the boards are like. Find a thing, figure out what to do with that thing, and then get a key when you figure it out. Things are broken up here and there, with enemy encounters on the board and short little quizzes, but for a majority of the time, you'll be exploring the board looking for stuff to progress. Now, there's a second board in here too, and it introduces some new ideas and what have you, but the gameplay and gameplay loop are mostly the same. Now, the reason why people don't seem to like this very much is probably for a few reasons. A big part of the boards are wandering around a bit aimlessly until you find something important, and that feeling of not really knowing if you're making progress doesn't feel very good. Secondly, the way the boards are brought up is a bit pace-breaking. You are kind of just forced into these long stretches of gameplay where it doesn't seem like much is really happening. There's dialogue throughout, sure, but it feels like your progression is being halted when you're forced into a board. Now, to be honest, that is literally the point. The game show is a distraction, and the characters mention during the chapter that they should probably stop playing and get to stealing the Dark Fountain. And also, Deltarune fans kind of have a problem when the story takes like a small backseat. If there isn't direct exposition happening, I noticed that a lot of fans start to get antsy, and I think that's a little silly, and it can be applied to here too. Now, the problem with an explanation like that, though, is that it doesn't really solve anything. The only thing it does is tell a player who's not enjoying it, oh, so that's the reason I'm not having fun. Now, I had the same negative opinion on the boards for a while. I kind of felt the exact same way. However, replays sort of changed how I feel about it entirely. These sections went from being my least favorite of the chapter to being my most favorite. I think repeat playthroughs really let the board game shine, as once you get that first playthrough out the way, your subsequent ones all become about routing and seeing how fast you can finish the boards. Getting S ranks on each one also really incentivizes you to replay as well, and it's certainly how I was won over. While I still don't absolutely love the boards, I by no means dislike them, and I honestly think each playthrough of them gets better. There's a certain point where the gameplay of them just flows really well. Getting a bunch of stuff done really quick back to back just feels really good. Now, Chapter 3 has a lot of other smaller playstyles with the minigames, but I'll be honest, I don't care. They're neat, but I'm very, very lazy and don't want to talk about them very much. They're all fun and cute. I love Susie Zilla, and I think rapid-firing them at tennis boss is a very cool way to bring these gimmicks full circle, and I like it a lot. But now, on to Chapter 4. Actually, not on to Chapter 4, because hi, if you enjoy, subscribe and join my Patreon. That is all. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Back to video. Chapter 4 introduces its main gimmick nearly midway through the chapter. We're introduced to this little big guy called Jackenstein, and he's a funny fella. Well, upon beating him, he bestows upon us the Climb Claw, spelt like that because, you know, cute. This becomes the big focus of the gameplay for the rest of the chapter, as after a bit of traditional Deltarune gameplay, you'll come into a section that requires them to progress, and then rinse and repeat. The function of the climb claws is take a wild fucking guess. This allows you to climb on specifically marked walls. By holding up, right, down, or left, you'll climb in that direction, not very complicated. However, when holding the A button, you'll begin to charge up a jump that can stretch up to 3 blocks. Whenever you begin climbing after landing from a charge jump, your climbing speed will temporarily increase by a large amount before gradually slowing back to normal. On the surface, it's a very simple gimmick, but I find it's one that shines when it's being used at higher level play. There's tons of optimizations that can be made by charging up the jump for however many blocks, and it leads to really fun speedruns of the climbing sections. But let me go over how they're introduced to the player. Now, it's not rocket science, but usually when a game introduces something to you, it does so over time, starting you off with the basics and then gradually introducing more depth and variety to the gimmick. If you've played, well, any game before, you'll understand this, but I thought I'd highlight how it's done here for a more comprehensive look. They're introduced to you firstly in a linear controlled environment where there's nowhere to fail. Boom. Then over time, they introduce more obstacles, namely these little pools of water that fall down every few seconds, that when coming in contact with, will send you falling down. Now, the result of falling down is never death, because there's always a bit of climbing beneath you to catch your fall, meaning coming in contact with them only serves to slow you down and inconvenience you. As you progress, more optional rooms using the climbing are added that get you further familiarized with the mechanic, giving you safe environments to actually improve. Later on, more obstacles and variety is added, such as obstacles that actually damage you, and enemies that you can damage if you charge jump at them. The whole thing culminates with the final climbs of the chapter before the Titan boss, where climbing is giving this extra feeling of triumph. As the Titan forms, you climb the shell of it, acting as this tower-like monolith. The stakes are high, and the game tests you with everything you've learned up to this point. There's more obstacles than ever, the water now damages you, but regardless, you keep climbing. I think it really helps the feeling of perseverance, given just how long both climbing sections are. They last way longer than the previous ones, and they don't really come with interruptions. It's just unending climbing. This whole section does a great job at both paying off the gimmick that was introduced and giving us this heightened sense of spectacle and impact. The mechanic of climbing was actually reused in Chapter 5 as well for the flowery boss, and it was doing the same thing it was doing in Chapter 4, acting as a quick set piece to sell the stakes at hand, giving you another feeling of triumph. It's a really fun mechanic that, while very simple and easy to understand, holds depth largely because of its optimizations, speedrun potential, and its spectacle. For a bit, I didn't care for it that much because I thought it was a bit slow, but on repeat playthroughs, just like Chapter 3, although to a lesser degree, I've came to appreciate it way more honestly. But all of this I've talked about up until now is just the appetizer, the entree, the pre-cum if you will, because Chapter 5 introduces without a doubt my favorite gimmick ever in Deltarune. You know, the game boards were quirky and the climbing was cute, but it's the real man's turn to feast on some bullshit. I'm talking about the platforming. So rather early on in the chapter, you encounter Aqua and she says something along the lines of, yeah, kick my ass and I'll let you get a feather, and you just do that. After progressing a little, after beating Aqua, you get the petal flower. And now the typical top-down perspective of the game shifts to a side-scroller angle. This fucks. Like, so hard. It is easily the best gimmick that's been put into the game. The genre of the game has changed before. I point to Chapter 3's board games, but this style just flows so much more naturally with Deltarune's gameplay, I feel. So whenever you come in contact with these statues, you can interact with them and have the perspective switch. And once the perspective switches, you're in for a treat. The platforming controls are rather simple, but ultimately they succeed at feeling very nice and responsive. It's nothing that crazy in terms of base movement. Again, it can't be too complex because you're introducing not just a gimmick, but an entirely new playstyle. Hell, entirely new genre to the game, so you have to ensure things remain simple enough for literally everybody to understand. With that being said, you still have some toys to play with. You have your basic run from left to right and your jump, but alongside this, you have your sword that you can swing both on the ground and in midair. While primarily used for combat, it's also used to cut down shit like vines. All around, the game feel of the sword is just very nice. In combat, I feel that battles can be a bit reliant on just spamming the sword. The game is rather forgiving in these battles, however, they're sparse enough to where the charm never really wears off, and you don't ever really feel like you're spamming. This could be considered a flaw in some way, for not just platforming, but a lot of Deltarune gimmicks in general. The consequence of failure or poor performance outside of the core battles are very low and forgiving. I'd say this works largely, however, as at the end of the day, these are gimmicks that exist throughout a single chapter for the most part. They have depth, sure, but they honestly don't need to have that much. While replayability does sometimes show the weak points of a gimmick like this, Deltarune isn't a game based on replayability, so having these gimmicks that are essentially a chapter-long novelty work. But back to just the platforming. The battles do feel very nice, and I do feel good when I swing my big sword at the bad guy. Outside of battles, though, you get 2 acts, one for each doofus. Rouse acts as a platform dangling from stuff, which is pretty cool. I found it to be a little boring and slow at first, but that's because I sucked ass with it. You can actually get a really good flow going with it if you're quick enough with acting and subsequently landing on Rouse. And then Susie just has Rude Buster. It's really only used in combat, but sometimes it's not. I don't know, I didn't play the game. And just like Chapter 4, Chapter 5 is a full circle moment with its gimmick being used at the very end. After a bit of climbing, you get to the final phase of Flowery's boss, where you're stuck full sprinting forward and have to time your sword swing at the right time, either on the ground or in air, and hit Flowery back. It's climatic, it feels powerful, and it does a great job at bringing the gimmick full circle. Now, unfortunately, I think the platforming has one big flaw. I think I would have liked to see more out of the platforming. It's not underutilized per se, but I found myself sad that there weren't enough true challenges within the chapter for me to overcome with. Most of them stem from the optional pink coin rooms, which is fine. The challenging rooms being optional is what it should be. The problem is, even at their hardest, I found myself clearing them with relative ease on my second or even first try. All in all though, despite that issue, I still think platforming is easily the best gimmick Deltarune has had. So far, we just have these 3, and you'd think that the next chapters would have one. It seems like a trend, but also with the seemingly darker tone of the next 2 chapters, maybe it'd be slightly out of place to introduce a new gimmick. And also with Chapter 6 being way shorter, I'm pretty unsure if chapter-wide gimmicks are going to continue. I hope they will, but you never know. So what have we learned? Toby Fox thinks he's hot shit. I have a soft spot in my heart for all the Deltarune gimmicks. I think they each have something very special going for them, and I appreciate them in the chapters they're in. And while I didn't really vibe with some of them at first, I've came to love pretty much all of them. I hope we do get gimmicks for the next 2 chapters, but if we don't, then oh well. We at least went 3 for 3, and ending it on the high note that is the platforming gimmick is something I can live with. If you enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe, and also consider joining my Patreon, link in the description for early access to videos. I'll see you all next time. Peace.